From here in the northern Negev, not too far from that Israel-Egyptian border, we're obviously still wanting to get more from the IDF's investigation, but what we know so far, a bit of a timeline. At around 2:30 in the morning, between Friday and night and Saturday morning, as you mentioned, Sarah, a drug smuggling attempt thwarted by the Israeli military. Some hours later, said to be around 6 o'clock in the morning local time, that Egyptian security officer crosses through an emergency gate in the border. There is then the point in time between 6 and 7 where those 2 Israeli soldiers were killed. The initial investigation shows they did not return fire. Contact was only made with them a few hours later, another point that's being investigated. Later on in the day, an IDF drone spots the intruder. The Egyptian security officer is not fired on at that point and is apprehended on foot. And during the course of the apprehension, an exchange of fire, and a third Israeli soldier is killed, and the Egyptian security officer as well. Sarah, obviously a lot more questions than answers here. We know that the initial incident is about crime, not politics, about the drug smuggling. But exactly what were the motivations of that Egyptian security official in crossing the border? Was it, as the Egyptian military has said, as part of a good faith effort, albeit a poorly communicated good faith effort, to try to chase the smugglers, or was this something else? Of course, that's one of the central questions that's unanswered. And on the Israeli side as well, some operational questions, right? Why was contact only made with those 2 soldiers, or not made with them until hours later? Why was fire not returned on the intruder? Why was he not shot by that drone once the drone apprehended him? And other operational questions. Obviously, Sarah, it's a very, very remote border by Israeli standards, a very remote section of the border by Israeli standards, not necessarily intensively guarded, although there is reportedly a lot of technology used to guard the border. So not an easy task. And again, in a very crowded security agenda that Israel has, one, I think, should ask the question of how high on the agenda and high on the list of the priorities this is for a very, very busy and burdened Israeli military. But obviously that border still needs to be protected. It's still very, very important. And there are obvious sensitivities in terms of Israel's relationship with Egypt.
Owen Alterman, thank you for that update from the Negev Desert. And with me here in studio, I'm joined by Ambassador Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France, and I-24 News defense correspondent Jonathan Regev. Jonathan, I want to start with you. The IDF is being criticized for its handling of the situation.
Strongly criticized because there are some very significant points which I'll call this a failure, loud and clear. First, an Egyptian policeman is able to cross into Israel undetected. That Egyptian policeman is able to kill 2 Israeli soldiers in Israeli territory. The last time there was communication with those 2 soldiers was around 4:15 a.m. Their bodies were found at 9 a.m., meaning there were 5 hours between the last time that there was communication with them until the army realized they were dead. The assumption is that they were dead for about 3 hours before the army realized this was happening. As Owen just said, this is a very remote area of the border, no civilian communities. A lot of luck there, because had there been civilian communities, that Egyptian policeman could have simply walked there with no one knowing. But since this was a very remote area, he was hiding. In the desert. It took a lot of time until the army realized what was happening and closing in on him. But that's not the end of it, because at this time, the army, understanding there's a terrorist on the ground, it went out searching for him. At that point, when the army already understanding what is happening with a massive force inside Israeli territory, the terrorist should be shot and killed with no casualties on the Israeli side. But the terrorist was able to kill and injure kill another Israeli soldier, injure another one before he was killed himself. Many questions there. I can tell you that we spoke to the head of the Southern Command of the Israeli Army, Eliezer Toledano, yesterday. These questions were raised by me and other reporters in the area. The Army was not very happy with these questions, but the Army also understanding that this is an issue that has to be investigated and has to be investigated fast, because these are incidents that can happen again today and tomorrow. Another thing, let's remember, this is the second infiltration into Israeli territory in a few months, which is undetected. The first one from Lebanon a few months ago, the terrorist was able to plant an IED inside Israel, 50 miles away from the border. Now this infiltration again, many questions there.
Many questions and not so many answers. Ambassador, I want to get your take on this story, because this surely is putting a strain on Israeli-Egyptian relations.
Well, in this tragic event, tragic for a few families and very difficult for the IDF, as was just pointed out, there is maybe one ray of light, and that is the vested interest that both Israel and Egypt have in clarifying this as quickly as possible.
Right.
Both countries value the relationship that has settled on this border and in general between the two countries. And, you know, if I may spill over a little bit between the diplomatic and the strategic, let's not forget the fact that this has become a peaceful border is of strategic importance for Israel, for the choice of where to put much of the effort, of the military effort by Tzahal. This is considered to be a border where the only real threat is from smugglers.
Right.
So I think that both countries, for Egypt too, this peace agreement is of great importance. I think that both countries will have an interest in clarifying this, and unless something that will make the Egyptians really uncomfortable emerges, I think that that will be the case.
Well, Netanyahu will be sort of in a tight spot here between wanting to get to the bottom of this investigation and also not wanting to strain relations with Egypt.
Well, you know, you can achieve both. It might be that there was some misunderstanding, miscommunication, or that this was an individual initiative by this particular policeman. We have to let the investigation go on. Egypt plays a very important role in Israeli strategy, both in general, as I spoke, but also in matters concerning Gaza, in matters concerning the Abraham Accords, enlarging Israeli relations in the Arab world. Egypt is a strategic partner.
Ambassador Daniel Sheck, Defense Correspondent, thank you both for joining me in studio.